Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us after lunchtime. I know this is always a fun time to come back to conferences. Um, but thanks for being here. Welcome to the What Could Go Wrong? Building a Long-Term Archive in the Real World presentation by Patrick Mead and Steve Barnett. There should be some time at the end for Q&A. You're welcome to drop your questions in the chat or hold them to the end, your choice. Today's presentation, as I said, features Patrick Mead and Steve Barnett from the IceCube Neutrino Observatory. IceCube is a cubic kilometer scale particle detector embedded deep in the Antarctic ice at the South Pole, designed to study neutrinos and some of the most energetic phenomena in the universe. Steve Barnett leads a team that manages the Northern Hemisphere computing systems for the IceCube Neutrino Observatory. Patrick Mead is a software engineer and systems developer working on scientific computing, data movement, and software infrastructure projects supporting the IceCube collaboration. Please welcome Steve Barnett and Patrick Mead.
Oh, hey everyone. It's good to see you all. You made it after lunch, so we thank you for that. As Dave said, I'm Steve Barnett. I think I know most of you, if not all of you on the call at this point. Patrick is with me in the office. We got some interesting stuff to cover, so I'll start us off with a basic overview of IceCube. I'll try to keep that brief, and then we'll turn it over to Patrick because he's got the good and interesting stuff going on there. So here we go. All righty. So yeah, just a quick overview of IceCube. I mean, as Dave read in his intro, it's a neutrino detector buried at the geographic South Pole. But it's really a collaboration of 450 scientists scattered across, 58 or more institutions, depending on the day, and in 14 countries around the world. So it's really a global operation. It's a National Science Foundation major facility. So if you poke around the NSF's website too often, you'll probably stumble across us there once or twice. And UW-Madison is the lead institution for that collaboration, meaning that all of the data that the detector generates eventually makes its way here, and then some of it is processed here, others are delivered to other parts of the world for people doing their analysis work wherever they may be. Quick recap of a neutrino, nearly massless particle that they predicted mathematically in the early 1930s. But it took them 26 odd years to actually prove that the darn thing existed and that it wasn't just a mathematical construct. Because it really doesn't interact with matter very much at all, right? There are trillions of these things produced every second by the sun, flowing through our bodies, and in an average human lifetime, one of those trillions per second might interact with our bodies. So it detecting them is a tricky thing, and we don't detect them directly. We actually detect the light that they produce when they interact and produce a secondary particle called a muon. Uh, when they produce that, light goes flashing through, hopefully, through our detector. This image is kind of a cartoon representation of the IceCube detector itself. So down in the bottom right there, you can see the Eiffel Tower for scale. And then up on the surface, you can kind of get an idea of how all of the data cables are laid out. There are 86 cables in the ice. There are optical modules, so light detectors that are spaced out on those cables, starting at a depth of about 1,500 meters and spaced out evenly down to a depth of around 2,400, 2,500 meters, depending. Um, they sit there and basically stare at the ice all day. The ice there is very, very clear. So when we get an interaction and a particle goes shooting through the ice, we can see it there. It's also very, very dark with over 1.5 kilometers of ice on top of it. It cuts down the background quite a bit, although not completely. So that runs 24/7 down at the pole. They've been very, very happy and very proud because they have maintained, realistically better than 98% uptime, and in some months, 100% uptime, which is not easy to do when your entire operation is powered by diesel generators. Um, it takes a lot of hard work to make that happen. So, that detector down there in the ice generates about a terabyte per day of raw data. But we can't look at all of that data day after day. So communications down at the pole is handled by satellites and not by happy Starlink satellites like you have running around now that can get you hundreds of megabits per second, but by some mishmash of satellites, some NASA mission satellites when we can get time on those, and satellite time on other things that we can beg, borrow, and steal. I think the oldest one we had, I don't know when that was retired a couple years ago now, was the GOES 3 satellite. That was a weather satellite launched in the 80s. It was out of fuel and drifting up and down over the equator, but we could use the telemetry channel from it, to actually get connectivity at maybe a megabit per second. So that tells you kind of how desperate you can get. But what that means is that we can only get about 10% per day of the data that the detector generates back up over the satellite and bring that back here and start the processing. So in that case, then, to deal with that, we basically write two copies of the data at this point to hard drives down on the station. And then when it opens up in the fall in October and November, they pack up the hard drives that have been written so far and they put them on planes, trains, and automobiles and ships, actually, in this case, and they send them back here to Madison, at which time we get to read them, and all of that data flow is kind of handled by a homegrown system called Jade, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the next few slides here. So this is kind of a cartoon of the data transfer. The real thing is much more complex. So it starts with what we call the DOM hubs. That's the only custom hardware in the detector, at least on the surface electronics, for reading out all of the data coming out of the instruments in the ice. It packages those up and hands them off to an event builder, and that is basically sitting down and taking the little flashes of light that the optical modules detect and building them into a series of hits that constitute an event. The next piece of the chain is triggering and filtering. So that's where they sit down and start making the first decisions about how interesting an event might be, because not every event is equally interesting. Um, and that's where they also do kind of that first step of data reduction to get us from that terabyte per day down to the 100 gigabytes per day. Then that pipes it into our data transfer system. That's Jade that I talked about earlier, which sits down and takes those streams and shoves one of them on the raw stream off onto down there. It says tape because once upon a time it was tape, and we'll be talking about that. And then takes the reduced data stream and pushes that into the satellite data queue, which eventually transfers that via bulk satellite transfer up here to the north, and where it eventually lands in our data warehouse. And at that point, the long-term archive process kind of picks up the tab and away it goes. And that's where things can kind of get interesting, at least for the purposes of this talk. So with that, I'll hand it over to Patrick and he'll tell you the rest of the story.
All right. So the long-term archive system that we have is set up. I mean, we want to move a copy of our data to several locations so that, if we need to bring it back or we need to do something with it, that we've got a copy, and we've got a copy in several places. Um, the current system, and you see a picture of it now, we send data to NERSC in California. We send it to TAC, the Texas Advanced Computing Center in Texas, and also to DESI in Germany. That's how the system looks today, but this is more of a story of how we got to this setup. So, as Steve said, we started with tape at the South Pole. And, tape is awesome because it's low cost. It's very rugged. If you drop it on the ground, you're better off dropping a tape than you are a hard drive in terms of your data surviving the fall. And tape doesn't cost anything to keep in offline storage. I mean, sometimes there's this thing that you want to keep disks online, but if you do, then you have to pay the electricity costs and the server costs and the bandwidth costs and all that. But tapes sit on the shelf and they basically sit there and do nothing and they're cheap. So that's why tape is awesome. In the older Spade software that existed when I first came to IceCube, we were writing files one at a time to the tape. And that was okay, but you get this sort of performance problem if you want to get, the 200th file off of the tape, you sort of have to advance through 199 files to bring it off. So the first suggestion to me was like, hey, why don't we just write all of the data in one shot to the tape? Because we can get a lot of performance benefits that way. We'll just, tell it, give me the 200th file and bring it back. So that's what we did. We wrote the Jade software to do that. But tape is not always awesome because the error rates that we were getting on the drives would cause some tapes to fail. And this is because, when you have an error, it's kind of like it goes on and continues to write the data. And as it continues to write the data, you're consuming more space on the tape, but not necessarily writing your data to the tape if there was an error. So some tapes were failing before we could actually get all of our data written onto it. And if you've got the software writing all of the files at once to the tape, you can do something where you turn that down and don't write so many files at once. But if your tape is good, you're sort of wasting it. And as the supply at the pole is limited and getting new supplies to the pole only happens at very certain points during the season, you don't want to burn through too many of your tapes. But we did have a lot of tapes down there, so that is great. But the tapes that we sent down there from a new vendor did not work at all. You put them in, you couldn't write one file to them, let alone a full tape worth of data. And the real question was, well, why? Why is this not working? Well, all of the machines that were operating down there are being operated outside of their environmental specification. We're at 10,000-foot elevation, and there's zero humidity at the pole, 0% humidity, like nothing. So for most things, that's not a problem, but for the tape machines, and we're going to come up on Steve's favorite email of all time. Jens, the winter over who was down there, sent me an email. Hi, Patrick. We did some further investigations on the issues with the tapes. To check if maybe the low humidity has an influence on the tapes, we put a couple of LTO4 tapes in the greenhouse. After one day in the greenhouse, we could write a handful of files to tape, which did not work at all before. So, by putting the tape in the greenhouse for a few days and letting it soak up some moisture, they actually became usable. So, yeah, that tapes were a real big pain in the butt, causing a lot of problems for many, many years. So finally, hard drives reached the point where they became feasible. We got, they're cheap enough per terabyte that we could ship drives down there, write the data to the drive, and then ship that back. So, being able to move away from tapes was a light at the end of the tunnel. We got these disks now, and we are happy to never, ever, ever have a problem with a tape system ever again. So, one of the things now that we've got disks coming back, we need a prototype LTA system to start copying our data to places. And this prototype LTA system will copy the data out of our warehouse and send it off to these offsite locations. And it's got some rudimentary status and reporting stuff, but it had no explicit software support for the disks. And this is like, wait, what? How did we miss that? Because it's kind of like the disk comes back and we need to plug it in, copy all of the data off of the disk to our warehouse, and then somebody can tell LTA, yeah, please copy it from our warehouse to the site. There's no handling of the disks other than what a human being wants to do with it. And this turns into a little bit of a problem because the data warehouse is getting full, 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 full. And I'm sure if you buy Steve a beer sometime, he'll tell you about the horrible effects of filling your file system all the way to 100%. But I mean, this has other problems in the sense that you have to copy all this data to the disk just to make sure you've got it all. Then you instruct LTA to send it out. But while that's happening, you don't know how many disks you still need or not. And part of what we do is we send half of our disks back to Pull in order to keep the costs down. So if we don't know how many disks we can give back, the recycling count isn't available. So then the new order quantity is very difficult to figure out. Like, well, do we need to order twice as much because we can't recycle or what? So that was kind of a pain. Another problem that we experienced was 4 disks came back from the poll as just blank. There's no data, no metadata. The label that was applied to them says they should have data, but they don't. Next season, the Winter Rovers find 4 unknown disks in a cabinet and ship them back to us. And these turn out to be the real data disks. So somehow the label got put on the wrong disks and the real disks got put in a cabinet. I'm not sure how that happened. So that's the real question. Why did we not know? Like, we've got a bunch of disks and they have really important data on them. So how did we not know that this was the disk? We never recorded the hardware serial number that was associated with that disk. So if it didn't have like our data that we wrote to it, this is like, this is just a random disk that could have come from anywhere. So I start recording the hardware metadata to say, here's the serial number of the disk. This is the slot it was sitting at pull. And I'm thinking, okay, we will never need that data, but if we ever get a wrong disk again, at least we can tell. So with all of those problems, we think, all right, maybe we should put some software support in for LTA. Maybe we should, actually handle the disks or have software that handles the disks for us and automates this process. And so I wrote this retro disk copy thing, and the way it started out was, kind of dangerous. The robot would say, give me these disks. But if you put in too many disks, it could in fact fill up the warehouse. But over the course of that first season that we worked with it, the robot got a lot better. And we could just load up a whole box worth of disks, and the robot would just handle the disks, taking bytes at 10, 20 terabytes at a time and getting it automatically shipped. Turned out to be pretty good. In fact, it was a sort of a smashing success, and you can kind of see from this graph. We were moving old data back, old data that we hadn't archived yet. You can kind of see that from 2017 to 2022. And the graph is kind of crooked as we do things manually. Once you get to 2022, retro disk copy is like, okay, we're going to send a bunch of data. And then you're waiting for the next set of data to come back from the pull, and we'll send some data. So you get this stair step thing. So it was clearly pretty good. It worked well. Now, our target with the NSF is to get all of our data out to these archival sites within 90 days. And we thought, well, hey, what if we can get it under 30 days? We'd have to sustain over a gigabyte a second for this entire time of 30 days in order to do that. And we can't do that with a human manually doing it, but now we've got the automation. So maybe we can get the 30 days this time. But Metallica shows up, and there's this song, No Leaf Clover. And one of the lyrics is, and then it comes to be that the soothing light at the end of your tunnel is just a freight train coming your way. And that's what it was. It was a disaster. We sent recycle disks down to the pole to be reused, but there was a problem in the process of putting those disks in, reformatting them, and writing data. Instead of reformatting the recycled disks and using them, they were reformatting the data disks. And so the data we had already taken was reformatted, overwritten, destroyed. And recycled disks that we had sent back 2 seasons ago were put into the box and they came back to us. And this was a thing. Steve was actually loading those up over in Chamberlain, and I was here in my office at 222. And looking at that, I was like, wait a minute, what is going on here? And then I realized, like, oh, this is bad. And it turned out that that hardware serial number was the metadata that we needed to figure out this is what was wrong. To figure out, oh, these are the disks. This is why. These disks had never been overwritten. So what happened to our data disks? Well, our data disks sat in the same spot in the same machine, 4 change cycles in a row, and they got reformatted. And because of the metadata, we knew that. So our 30-day goal kind of got blown out of the water because we had to investigate what was going on with this. Fortunately, we still had the satellite data, so it wasn't a absolute complete total disaster for the data, but losing the raw data kind of hurt. So that wasn't great. Another problem that we faced after that, NERSC sent us an email saying, hey, your project allocation is over, so could you migrate that 5 petabytes that you have in our system off of the system pretty soon? And we're like, oh, uh-oh. So we contacted the PI who was responsible for that, and they got the project allocation, restarted at NERSC, and everything was fine. We didn't have to migrate our data. But in the meantime, we picked up a new site, TAC, and we figured, okay, let's move our data, or at least copy our data to TAC. So we've got another site, so that way if NERSC ever goes away, which this was kind of scary, that we'd be able to do that. Fortunately, both of these sites support Globus, so doing a transfer between the sites is going to be super easy. But it was not easy. We started a Globus transfer from the tape system at NERSC and immediately get banned. because the Globus transfer does not play nicely with the tape system. The tape system is constantly changing tapes because it's not doing the files in the right order. And they're like, hey, stop hurting our tape robot. We don't like that. So they banned us. And we fixed the software and begged to come back on. And they were like, okay, we'll let you back on now that your software is there. In their, you know, to give them credit, they do have in their documentation that you should not do this. So it was kind of my fault for not reading the docs. That's not a thing you want to do. So we start pulling the data off of the tape at NERSC in an orderly fashion, and we start sending it to TAC. And we're thankful we'll never have trouble with anybody else's tape system ever again. This is awesome. And the Globus transfers are hitting disk quotas at TAC. They would stop and say, oh, quota, oop, quota, but they keep retrying and eventually they succeed. And Globus says, yep, your transfer is good, so everything is okay. Except it wasn't okay. Globus plus a disk quota ended up leaving a hole. Now, this isn't just like, your data is there and it's got a bunch of zeros. This is like you opened a file, you seeked way up to, 64 megabytes into the file and then started writing data. What's in that first 64 gigabytes? And according to the POSIX standard, it's a hole. There's nothing there. There's not zeros, there's not anything. And the tape system at TAC did not like the holes. It would write that to the tape, and then the tape would just start spinning, and it would not stop until a human came and pushed the button. So we broke their tape system. And TAC called their tape system vendor for help to make that work. We had to do some remediation and send extra copies from NERSC, but we got that taken care of. Then TAC got a new tape system, this new ranch, and they started migrating their stuff. And they said, okay, everybody migrate your stuff to the new system. But they sent us an email that said, because your data was curated so well, we kept it all on disk as well as tape, and we used your data to test the new system for performance and functionality. And I was like, oh, that's sweet. Our data is awesome. And they're like, wait a minute. Huh. This may translate to, please don't break our new tape system. We moved your data for you. Which, Frank over there, Frank Duma was at TAC, and he was a very professional, awesome guy. I don't think he actually meant this, but he might have meant it, depending on how badly we actually treated their old tape system. Um, but, after resolving all of those, we did have larger buffers now on the side of both NERSC and YPAC. We had lots of terabytes. We could do a whole season at once on disk on both sides. So we thought, all right, this might be the year that we finally get in under 30 days. Grid FTP went away, so we couldn't transfer using that anymore. So we made a Globus component to use transfers in the LTA software. But Globus caps concurrent transfer requests at 3 per account. We used to do up to 32 with Grid FTP. In theory, we could have done more, but we only ever capped out at 32 because that was all we needed. But that meant we couldn't really transfer at 1 gigabyte per second. So better luck next year, maybe. Anyway, when Gandalf was falling down the hole after fighting the Balrog, he gave a very succinct bit of advice to the Fellowship. He said, fly, you fools. Like, get out of here before you get killed. So this is where the point we've come to in this talk. We're going to distill all of this wisdom of these terrible incidents down. The first one is requirements gathering is always hard. Up front, you need foresight to figure out what are people really going to need? And users are terrible at telling you what they need until they see the system working and they go, it doesn't do this thing I want it to do. But afterwards, if you write a bunch of stuff, you've got legacy code to change. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Requirements gathering is hard, and too much requirements gathering is almost enough to get the software you want. The next bit of advice is if you depend on a capability, make sure you've got that capability. Writing all of the data to a tape in one shot seemed like a great idea, but it turned out to be the source of most of the pain that we experienced during that tape season. And this kind of comes up to Chesterton's fence. Find out why you did something the way you did it before you change it. Spade wasn't writing a file at a time to the tape because, we wanted to, but because it was the best way to use the tape under those conditions. And we didn't realize that before we shot ourselves in the foot trying to do it all at once. Metadata is always your friend, especially checksums, dates, and IDs. Always, for sure, record this stuff early and often, because if you don't need it, you usually don't mind because it doesn't take up that much room. But if you do need it, you will be very, very thankful that you did. Do all your dangerous stuff in the best conditions possible. That data disaster happened because we were reformatting the recycle disks at the pull. We were having the operators reformat the disks, and that turned out to be like the source of the disaster. Now we do all of our reformatting in the north. All they have to do is just stick the drive into the machine and turn it on. Well, that's it. So the dangerous stuff happens here, where we've got plenty of time and plenty of resources to work with it. So yeah, do your dangerous stuff in the best conditions possible. Read the docs, especially the ones that tell you how to use the tape system. That'll avoid you getting banned from systems you don't want to get banned from. And, it's just a good practice in general to read the docs. Docs are not always easy to write, so if somebody's gone to that trouble, yeah, pay the respect of reading the documentation. Never ever trust Globus. It it is very convenient, but it will come and bite you in the ass if you don't check up on it. You can use it for transfers, but never trust what it says. Always verify. And put your tapes in the greenhouse. When you've got nothing to lose, you've got everything to gain. Our systems weren't working. We didn't have tapes we could write to, and it's like, well, throw it in the greenhouse. Let's just see if it works, right? I mean, it's a long shot, but it actually gave us the tapes we needed to get through the season. Um, and that's it. That's the end of the talk. If you have any questions, we're both here.
Awesome. Thank you for that awesome presentation. There have been a few fun comments in the chat. Um, I did want to bring up a couple of the questions that I see. The one I see from Ken is, are you going to eventually be transferring over to Kermit?
Definitely. When in doubt, go retro. Absolutely. So, nothing is off the table.
We'll have to do our X modem and Y modem implementations first,
Oh,
and then
yep,
then the current implementation.
exactly.
Excellent.
Hmm.
Let's see. Are there any other questions that I'm missing? Don't
Let's see.
quick scroll. I don't really see any.
Yeah. Labels on discs, not to be confused with disc labels. Yes, definitely so. So the general process with these things is the winter overs have boxes and boxes of discs, right? And they take them out. There's a disc array that they can swap them into, and then when they're done, they label a printed label on the disc itself. It's very helpful. So some of the stuff we couldn't get to, Patrick's software, Jade, basically you've got a file system on there and it records a whole pile of metadata on the disks, about what files are on there, when they were taken, all that type of good stuff. And that's right there. And that's actually a very important safety check for us, right? When Jade opens a disk and says, let's write this, it first checks to see if that's even there. And if it is, it throws up a flag and warnings and just stops and, yells loudly at the operators that they should check what's going on before anything proceeds. So, um, there are multiple levels. We could talk for hours on this if anybody's ever interested. So,
Yeah, and I meant it about the beer and the file system filling up. That is a horror story all on its own.
many of them. So, yep,
Awesome.
cool. Anybody have anything else? I mean, we'll be here all day. So, let's check in the chat. No. Oh, Dave, you said you'd had great experience. Globus is great, right? But when you start doing a lot of heavy duty transfers, right? Because I mean, we're talking petabytes and petabytes. You find the interesting little corner cases, and system interactions.
Yes.
Todd,
Hey, Steve, can I ask you a question on tape, my friend?
yeah, yep, yep,
Hey, like last time I've used tapes, like it really preferred fewer numbers of large files. Has anything changed in that technology, or is it still really kind of fewer large files that are zipped, they're tarred, whatever, uh,
yep.
versus lots of raw small files?
Yeah, no, they definitely prefer the larger, fewer larger files, right? And because essentially it's all still the streaming technology. So,
Right.
part of the the problem with the small files is you get what they call shoe shining. So you write a file and the tape physically keeps moving, past the end of the write. And then when you say, here's the next file, it has to back up to where it left off and then do that again. And so when you get those tiny files, it keeps doing that, which, wears on the tape and the tape drive heads and also kind of stretches the tape out so that you really want bigger, fewer. And that's, when we archive things to NERSC at this point, at one point we're writing like 800 gig files, I think, and now we're writing 100 gig files because on the retrieval side, it gets really unwieldy to say, hey, give me back 800 gigs so I can get the, 2 gigabytes in the middle that I'm interested in.
Right.
So, yeah, it hasn't gotten any better to deal with.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Uh, in the interest of time, I do see a couple questions that came in, but officially the session is over and there's a 10-minute break between sessions.
Sure.
If you'd like to answer those questions, I won't stop you, but I just wanted to let people know that technically it's break time. So if you need to take a break, do it.
Yep. And yeah, so we'll stick around and answer the questions. So I see Lyle had something
Mhm.
and Ken, anybody? Yeah. So if you want to sit down and chat, yeah, Vince, we feel your pain. LTO tapes are not always LTO tapes, it turns out, even though they say LTO on the box. So yeah. So Lyle, we've had asking about file systems. So we've had kind of 4 generations, if you will, of file systems. The first one was, when in doubt, you start with NFS. And then you get more and more NFS servers piling up, and you come to hate yourself for that. All the problems dealing with that. No AFS, Ken. No, no, no. Um, the first one we moved to, at the time, and a lot of this is driven by cost sensitivity. So the first kind of cluster file system we moved to was called iBricks, and it was a product actually came out of Pixar and making movies. Really worked pretty well, and actually worked generally okay until there were a couple of upgrades and then we got some bad storage in there, and it turns out that none of these file systems really like it when storage goes away. And so that thing got to a point where it was kind of read only. And from there, we moved to Lustre, which is a similar beast that comes out of Lawrence Livermore National Labs. And, that one did okay, but, for all of these things, when they start getting full, what ends up happening is, essentially you have piles and piles of disk servers and some metadata servers that glue all that together. And as the file systems get full, they spend so much time hunting for available free space that your performance really starts degrading. If you happen to lose any hardware, or too many different types of failures, they get badly confused. And they're really complicated to kind of stitch back together. And now we're using Ceph, which is more resilient to, individual component failure than some of the other systems, but shares all of the hatred of small files. Um, and everything kind of with that. And with the, erasure coding and things like that, if you fill them up beyond a certain point, your redundancy degrades with that, right? So if you say, hey, wait a minute, I've got my file system at 95% full and, a full machine goes offline, for example, and that machine accounts for more than 5% of your available storage, you suddenly have a read-only file system. And hopefully it's coming back soon, so you go away from a read-only file system, but it's not a great place to be. So I don't know if that answered your question. And
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
yeah, yep.
Well, thank you very much. I know I have to run off to a different session, so we
Great.
probably need to close this one down.
Fair enough. Thank you, everyone, for coming back after lunch. I know that's never an easy thing, especially when the weather is nice like today. Y'all should really be on the terrace, but thanks much.